Welcome back to week 2, round 2 of efficient Rails test-driven development. How was the homework, guys? You're creating my app right now? Is it running? No? Was it too hard? Who managed to do some of it? That's a good turnout. Cool. Who got stuck somewhere? Not bad, actually. Cool. Okay, well, I wanted to talk more about model testing. As I mentioned to you last week, you get the most bang for the buck if you focus on model testing. And pretty much today, the entire session, we're going to talk about what are different things to test on the model. And I'm going to start with this slide. There's a prison. It's actually the former East German border. So a model should be like a prison. You should control the access to the data very tightly and in a very well-known way. This is what all the model tools are for. Things like, callback hooks or custom finders or validation rules. They all control, what comes in and out of the models. And the more effort you spend controlling this gate, the more secure your application, the fewer bugs you're going to deal with the controller, the better. So in this session, we're going to basically talk about all the tools that are available through ActiveRecord, A. So it'll be a review of ActiveRecord for some of you, and some of you might learn some new things about ActiveRecord. And B, we'll go over in detail how to test each aspect of those tools. Okay, so what can we test our models for? We can test them for validation. This is something we got into last week a little bit, and also the homework covered some of that. We're going to test them for side effects that happen in these so-called callbacks, stuff that can happen before saving or after saving or before creating or after validating or various things that happen around the core operations of the model. We're going to look at associations. Associations are a big topic in ActiveRecord, and there's various things we can do with them. The has many association that belongs to, and they come with a rich plethora of options also. And I'm going to actually spend quite a bit of time on explaining what different options are available, because I find this is a much underutilized feature, which has a lot of power. And if we understand that right, and we know how to test for it, then we can avoid a lot of trouble in our controllers and elsewhere higher in the application. Things like association proxy methods are on that list. Who knows what an association proxy method is? Great, okay. I think I'm hitting the bullseye with the material today. Very good. Named scopes. Who knows what a named scope is or has heard that feature before? Named scope is a feature in ActiveRecord. Okay, a couple hands here. Okay, great. Yeah, I'm going to go over those a little bit. Nested attributes, something we're probably not going to get to this class, but we're going to talk about that next class in detail when we talk about controllers also and testing controllers. And observers and custom methods. These are all the things we have typically in our models floating around somewhere, and we want to test for them. Let's talk about the homework a little bit. So we had this was the homework. And in the new way of doing behavior-driven teaching, or actually, Sarah pioneered the test-first teaching approach. So here we have the behavior-first teaching approach, BFT, where basically we write the specs on the wall in plain English, and then we can write the RSpec spec for that, and then the code for that. Person should save correctly. So we had a person object with a first and a last name, and we wanted to assure that that person gets saved and also has the requirements. We did it already in class last time. Welcome. A person can have many addresses. That's an association that we wanted to add. And then there's some rules about the addresses. The address must have a street, it must have a city, and it must have a zip code. And purposefully or not, I left the state off here. We will get that in this week's homework. And then the person can have an optional country, and if the country is left blank, it should default to the US. Who got all of these done? Yay. Good job, guys. About half the class. Very good. Okay, so I'm going to go through it step by step, and we're going to see what sticks and what was difficult. So please, at this point, feel free to chime in. The reason I had you do this homework is to engage with the material. And then right now, this might be a review for you, hopefully solidifying a few things. Or if you had struggles with the homework, then maybe this is, the next hint how to solve it better. And without further ado, let's do something. So a person should save correctly. So I am going to go to my application that we developed last week. Okay, so this is where we got last week. We have a person object, person model, and we have a person spec that checks, that the first name, the last name is there. And also checks, that you can save the guy. So this is all good. So let's continue. Let's make the addresses. So what do I need to do to make an address model? Script generate. Yep. We can do script generate. We can do it in RubyMine, or we can do it on the command line. Let's do it in the command line. This one. Script generate our spec model address, and then the address is supposed to have a couple of fields. How do we specify those? Anyone? The address is actually that was the person, so the address has a street, a city, and but the colon string part is what it was after. So street, string, city, string, and in this case I'm going to make the zip also a string. Address needs a string? Should be capitalized probably, or camel cased. And then we want the address to associate with a person. So what needs to happen here? Person ID, colon, what? Integer. Right. So it's a numerical, this is the foreign key. It's a numerical, whoa, something didn't work. No such file directory. Database YAML, right. Very good. I shot myself in the foot. This is a fresh copy of the project, and there is no database YAML. That was a test for you guys. Make sure you can handle it. Okay. I'm just going to copy my trusty database YAML file from the other app. Okay. Let's try that again. There we go. That looks better. Is the font size all right for the last row? Hi, we? Yeah? Okay. Okay, so now we have that. And now I have a migration that I need to run. Okay. So, and it made a couple of files here. It made, among other ones, this one. And most of this stuff is not that useful. So what I was after is the validation part. So I want to require that the city, street, and zip code is present. And I'm going to wrap that into a context, which is just an alias for describe. Validations. So now how do I check that it must have a city? What's a good pattern to check this? To write a test that verifies that the object requires a city or it cannot be saved. Right, which is? Somebody dictate. I'm just a typist here. That's a good idea. So we create a record, an address. .create. Do I actually need create here? No. New is good enough. Yeah, it's faster. And do I actually need to put anything here? What do I want to check now? So I have some sort of address which I want to be invalid because I forget the city.
I just say a.errors.on:city should not be nil.
Error.errors.on city should not be nil. That's a good statement. This is the thing that verifies that the error is specific to city. A little simpler test, which I like to do as well, is to just check if the thing is valid in the first place. And we don't expect this to be valid.
I did a.valid should equal false.
That's one way, yes. And so what John just said is a.valid question mark, right? So valid question mark is an active record method. You can do this. But RSpec gives us a little helper, which reads a little better. You can say on any question mark operator, that's a so-called predicate. Valid, blank, question mark, nil, question mark, empty, question mark, or anything else. Yes, last time we created a joke question mark method. Any of these you can also use with the be underscore. So you can say should or should not be, and then the predicate. And then RSpec, takes this apart, and throws a question mark at the end and then calls the method. Thanks to Ruby's dynamic language features. So this is sort of the preferred way. And then you have to check, because I left all sorts of other things up here blank, so I can't tell right now which is actually causing the error. So then we have to check that the error is actually caused by the city object, by the city attribute. Okay, so let's see here. And we get expected the address, yada, 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 to not be valid. I'll show you the migration file. Here's the new file. This is what it looks like. It added, the fields that I specified on the command line of the generator. If you don't get them right on the generator, oftentimes it's not worth fiddling with. Edit this by hand. It's probably the faster route to bliss. There's one thing I'd like to point out here. So we said t.integer, person ID. So the person ID is the foreign key. The migrations have another nice feature. You could also instead, equivalent to this would be t.belongs to person. You can say that right here, which is a nice okay. You can say that right here, which is a nice synonym to the belongs to association that we later put in the address model.
So that just gives you the person ID field.
Except you have to spell it correct. Yes. That'll give you a person ID correct. And we have the association is, and we haven't gotten there quite yet, but the association is, one person can have many addresses, but each address is unique to a person. So each address only belongs to one person. Okay, so let's continue with the city. So I just verified that it fails in the right place, so now I can go and really quickly add. This can be a fast process now. I can add the validation rule for the presence of a city. How does that go? What would I put here? Very good, and both wings of the room this time. Presence of city. Okay, let's try that again. There we go. Okay, so now I also have to validate that the zip code is there and the street is there. So I can go and copy and paste twice. Control D in RubyMine or Command D on the Mac. It does that. And I can just replace zip here and zip and street and street. All right, so we get two failures, these guys, and now what's interesting here, see this? It already passes this line. So it already knows it's not valid because this thing is also missing the city, which is already implemented. And so this is why it's important to check that the error is in the right thing here. This line is also key. It's nice to build them up like this. First you want to check not valid, it's a more general test, and then you go to the more specific. That's a general rule often in testing. Especially if you do TDD, the first thing you want to check is the simplest possible thing. So now we need to add two different rules here, which I can just add to this. I don't have to make new declarations, as long as they're all the same parameters. Okay, all pass. Now, this is kind of repetitive, If you recall, I spent a lot of time last time talking about dryness and not repeating yourself and, making sure that you have nicely factored code. And this doesn't really look very nicely factored. It's kind of the same, with the only difference is the attribute name in these 3 stanzas. Anybody have an idea how we could compact this a little better? Yes, very clever. I like that. Okay, so let's put an array here. The 3 things we care about: city, zip, and street. And then what?
Then do
each
each
attribute, right? Okay. So what Dan just said, what he's after is the same thing that I was after, is namely we're going to generate these 3 stanzas on the fly. We're not going to type them in by hand, but we generate our tests. And so I'm going to take this as my template and I stick it in there. And now I will replace every time I use the word city with attribute. And in this case, I need to interpolate the string here. So it needs to have double quotes. And down here also, I want to verify that it's got the attribute, without the colon. Now this attribute assumes the values city, zip, and street in 3 iterations through the loop. So it's equivalent to this kind of thing. And I can get rid of this. And I have a pretty compact test. But the output is still, I get still 3 different test cases. I get nicely formatted here, must have a city, must have a zip. And if any model thing happened, if the model got broken somehow, like if, somebody came in here and commented this out or something, then that looping test, that generating test, still gives me the right error message in the right place. Here, this one is failing. Do you guys see that? So this is a nice way to compact some of these more routine tests, especially validation, to dry them up, as we say in Rails lingo. Cool, okay. So we have a city and a street and a zip. Now there was this thing about, actually, before we go there, I'm going to resume the presentation a bit because I want to talk to you more about validation. And is it valid? That's always a big question in Rails, because we want to make sure that, as I said, showed with the prison picture earlier, that nothing gets in there that shouldn't be in there. And like the $20 bill has all these features to ensure validity, so do our models, or so rather should have our models. And we just have seen the example. I want to show you at a more theoretical level what this means and how we do it. Typically, the requirement is, why we want to verify validity is because the requirement is that something needs to be present, or something has to have a certain format, like emails have to have a certain format, for example. Something has to have a certain length. Something has to be a number or another number. Something must be unique. There's a number of different validation helpers, and all these requirements on the data can be expressed in those. The way we check if something is valid or not, based on all of these rules, is just simply with the valid question mark method, and then we check where the errors are. And Rails, provides a number of these, and I listed a few, but these are not even exhaustive. You can also make your own custom validation methods. Recently, I played with Active Merchant, which is a credit card processing plugin, or it's an abstraction layer to credit card gateways, and it has a credit card valid method. You can check if your credit card number is valid. There's a checksum algorithm you can run over it, and that it adds that to the model layer, so you can augment the existing validation methods with your own, if you need to. Questions about this? So how do we test this stuff? There's a pattern here. And this whole class I want to highlight common patterns in testing. Like there's always a feature that we want to use, and then we need to understand how we can make an efficient test for it. And testing goes like this. Typically, by the requirement, something is needed, so it requires X. I make a new model class. I check it should not be valid because it's missing the validation requirement. And then I verify the errors do show up on that attribute that I wanted to verify. So the simple high-level rule is instantiate the object with an invalid property. In this case, I make it very easy because I just put no properties. Sometimes it's a more complicated case. You have to actually construct some data that's actually invalid. You check for valid question mark, and then you check for the right attribute. That's the pattern. That's how validity can be checked. Maybe this is very simple, but I want to hammer this home because all the other tests we're going to do, all this other code, all the other Rails features, they always have a pattern like this to them. And the more you understand the pattern, you can think in those testing patterns, the easier it is for you to use these high-level Rails features and to actually write code that does what it's supposed to do without getting out of hand and having random, uncertain bugs and problems in it. So without further ado, let's go on to the next part of the homework, which was, if this works or doesn't work, we'll see. Okay. Yes, maybe? No? Okay. We had this other rule here. A person's address can have an optional country. And if the country is not there, then it should default to USA. How are we going to do that? So first, I need to actually add a country attribute. So we're going to make another migration. So this is how I would normally do it. I would make a new migration and then go in here and type by hand, add column. But I learned something last week.
It works if you specify the column name.
If you do it correctly.
You always do.
Add. Did I mistype that column? Addresses. The table is plural here now. Comma, country, string. And then we want to undo this one again in the down migration. Remove column, addresses, string. Okay, so now we can run our migrations. So there's a way to grab RubyMine migrations straight from here. And that worked. What I also like to do always is to run the redo migration. Do you guys know what that does? The redo migration migrates it down and then back up on the last migration. And that's important so that we get to test the down migration and then it goes right back up. So it does all that in one step. If there's an error in the down migration, it would fail. And then we have to fix it by hand. And I would say latest migration. This is all UI driven here. You can just, this is the command. User rake, here, rake db migrate redo. And you see here it reverts it and then it does it again.
You don't want colon string and remove column.
That's correct. It didn't seem to complain though, which is interesting. Let's try that again. That's why redo is handy. It didn't, yeah, actually that's correct. It didn't complain. Okay. Now I have a country. So the requirement is that the address should have an optional country. What that means is it mustn't be there, so we don't have to test for validation. But we want to test for defaulting it in case it's missing. How are we going to test that? Any thoughts? That's the feature we're going to use, right? How can we test that feature? We're going to use the before save callback hook to make this happen. But we want to also test for it. So we don't want to just throw a feature in there. We want to be able to test for it properly. Let's say when country is missing, it defaults to USA. Okay. So I'm going to create an object now. Now this time I want to create something valid, so I should pick the valid attributes. Now let's see, the country is not in here. So we want to check that the country is actually not there. So this is one way of doing it. What I kind of like to do is actually create this with new, then verify that the thing is not there, should be blank, right? Then we can save it. And then we can verify that the country is now there. So let's try that. Oh, I need to migrate first. My test database, so I have to run rakespec. Rakespec will automatically reload the schema into my test database. Just running the spec command by itself, which is what RubyMine does when I pull it down from the run menu. It does not do that. And then your tests fail because the schema is not updated. Oh, the street is still missing. Let's fix that real quick here. Okay, so I have an address when the country is missing. It defaults to USA. It expected here to get USA, but it got nil. That is sort of the expected failure. And now how we're going to fix it? Somebody already threw out before save. Right, so before save, what? What does before save do?
Checks if it's null.
Actually, before save doesn't check anything.
Something called
It calls a method, right? So when I specify that method here, I could call that whatever I want. You can also put a proc there. Although it's probably better to use a method, more legible. And then I make a method here with that same name. I'm going to make that private because it's nobody else's business really. It belongs purely to this model. And what should this do?
check if it's null.
Okay, if country dot blank. Why is blank? What's the difference between nil question and blank question mark? Stuart? Right, so it checks white space. Blank will return true if the entity is nil or a blank string. It has to be an empty string. Nil will only check for actual nilness of the object, and it will return true for an empty string. And in this case, we want to have the more general constraint. This is important because if this came from a web form, you know, for the browser submitted a form and there was a country field on there, then that would submit as a blank string, as an empty string. And so we want to catch that case as well. So if it's blank, then we want to do something self.country equals USA. Whoops, quotes. Now, I like to use self here because it makes it clear that this is actually a method on this object. Also, there sometimes seems to be an odd side effect. If you assign to an attribute, you don't put the self. Sometimes there's some issue. I don't know exactly what that is about. So just to be safe, if you assign stuff, you can do the same here on the getter. That works also. Do I have to save this now? No. Right. Because?
Before the save.
It happens before the save. It's in the callback chain. What happens if this throws an exception, this before method? It failed saving, right? So if you want to abort, not that this is the cleverest way to do it, but in some sort of truly exceptional condition that is not really a validation rule, you could throw exceptions in here, and it would prevent the saving from happening. There's also an after save, which has no such side effect. If you throw exceptions in the after save, all bets are, it's too late. It's already saved. Let's see if that does the trick for us. Okay, so far so good. Question? Yes, good question. Right, I think it's Stewart, right? Yeah. What Stewart is getting at here is, so this entity, this object A, is that the same object that gets updated, you know, when I call save? Like, is that the same thing that is operated on in the before filter, in the before callback? And that's a good question because this can trip us up when we do controller tests and we have sort of variables that we set up in our before stanza for the test. and then we run some stuff, and all of a sudden it doesn't pan out. We need to reload the object explicitly because the controller uses a different instance of the variable than the test does. In the model case, this instance of the variable is the exact same one that gets used in the execution of this code here. So this self refers to my A in the test. So in this case, I get away with it. But you have a good point. You could also put reload here, which actually refetches it from the database. It's not necessary because we trust that Rails, when it says it's saved and we use the before filter, that part, we don't try to test Rails here. We test just the logic that we put there. All right. So now what this is a thing that I like to call a side effect. Side effects are things that happen, around some main operation. The main operation here is saving. It could also be deleting or creating or updating. And do you want to put hooks around this? And there's many ways of doing hooks. Actually, the whole observer idea in Rails is implemented through these side effects. An observer is basically just an outside class that observes a state change on an object. Does it get saved or does it get updated or deleted? And then the observer can observe that event and run after, or before actions. Typically what that means is, you default something. That's what we did. Or it can mean, you encrypt some password. Many of the popular password authentication plugins for Rails do exactly that. They get the clear text password and then before saving, they encrypt it and save the encrypted password. It could also mean to send emails out to someone or do some sort of HTTP post to a remote server on some saving or creating of some object. And all these are side effects. Now, back to our paradigm, how do we do it as a pattern in testing? Typically, the requirement is you have to default a value or you have to send an email or post to a URL. And the implementation feature that we use for this is the before save or the after save. There's a number of them. There's also a before validate and an after validate that Rails provides for us. And how do we test them? Well, we just did the example. We test the callbacks through their side effects. Namely, we set up an object in some state before the callback. Like in our case, we had, an address with a blank country. We trigger the callback somehow. In our case, that meant saving. And then we check for the side effect, namely that the country got defaulted correctly. In this example down here, I put the password thing. Actually, this is completely the wrong copy here. Okay, never mind. It was late. But you get the idea. What this should say is check that the password got encrypted or got set. How are the callbacks triggered in ActiveRecord? There's a series of them. We have before validation and after validation. Those get called when you call valid question mark. And valid question mark is also invoked implicitly by .save and .create. And you can do stuff right after validation, but before saving. Then we have the before save and the after save, and those get invoked on create and save. You have before create, which is a flavor of the before save, but it only happens when the object is brand new on create. Same for destroy. And then there's also after find and after initialize. And that gets run, well, after a finder, like person.find ID. It runs this if defined, or new. The last two ones are not available through the declarative, before save : method. You have to actually override a method for it. And the reason is these are really high, have a high impact on performance, those two. And if you want to use those, read the docs. Probably you shouldn't. Questions about this stuff so far? The side effects and the callbacks, or testing for them? No. Okay, great. Rolling right along. Okay, so the next thing I want to go through in our high-level tour through ActiveRecord features and how to test them, there's another thing that we can use. Namely, we can use, and you've probably all done this, we can use custom finders. Custom finders are things that, find stuff subject to certain conditions. We have a default finder, like the person.find, and then parentheses, some ID. Sometimes you have some requirements of stuff you want to find. You want to only find person that matches a certain last name, or you want to find, person that matches, whose last name or first name matches the first couple letters that you typed into some form. And you could kind of use the standard finder, person.find, and then you put like 3 lines of conditions there. And you could stick all this into the controller. You could do that. I would not recommend that. And the reason we're talking about model testing is because ActiveRecord has cool features to abstract this stuff out. Your controller isn't going to look very compact. It's going to look cluttered with conditions. So the first rule would be to put a finder like this, matching on a couple letters, into the model. And let's just go through a couple examples here. Here's our requirement. So we want to implement an auto-suggest search. Now, remember, I'm not talking about the controller. I'm not talking about JavaScript or jQuery or Ajax and none of that. That's all fluff. That's easy. What's hard is to do the right stuff in the model. And what do we need to implement database-wise at the model layer to enable some sort of auto-suggest type search? What I mean by that is it's a search where you type a few letters and then it runs a database query and it checks if it finds records matching a few letters. In this case, somebody's name. So we want to partial match on first or last name. If I type Jon, I want to match these 2 people, for example, in my database. Great. So how are we going to test for this? And this gives me the segue to introduce things about faking some data. So if you want to find people matching a couple letters, we need to first create some people matching a couple letters. And we have so far experimented with, a valid attributes, variable in our before filter that came pre-generated from the RSpec model generator. And that's one way of doing it, but it doesn't scale very well. It gets cluttered really quick. And this is where generating data comes in. And so what I wanted to talk about next is, actually I'm going to skip one slide. We're going to come back to it. This is how we're going to test custom finders. I'm going to talk about factories. Factories are an umbrella term for several different technologies, and the one I'm going to use is Factory Girl. It's a gem that you can get off GitHub. And it's really simple to define a factory like this. You say factory define for a person. That figures out there should be a person model there. It looks for that. And then it figures out that that person model has certain attributes and it tries to set them. And it takes this block here, which lets you set the attributes. And notice there's no equal sign here. This is a function call, actually. It makes function calls. And very important, by convention, nobody will enforce this on you, but by convention, the factory should generally make valid things. It shouldn't make invalid things. Because you want to use them throughout your code, and I want to make a person, and then you don't want to be stuck with filling in additional details. Thank you for that comment. I'm assuming that somebody already wrote some validity check to make sure that a valid person requires these 2 things. Yes, very good point. And we did that last week, right? We have that in our application, that the first last name is required. So let's do a quick example on that. Okay, so I want to make a finder that has factory data. So we already have, let's close some stuff here. We already have a person spec there, that has this standard valid attributes thing that came from the generator, and we have the rule for the first and last name, and a couple other things. So now I want to make a factory. So first I have to, add the factory gem, a factory girl gem, to my test environment. So I go to test.rb. That is one of the environment files, and in here you'll see, if my RubyMine scrolling wasn't screwed up, you would see test.rb. You see here, this is what came from the RSpec generator. It requires a gem. So this is a way to, require certain gems for your application. And that's nice to put here, because if you run your specs and somebody else downloads the code, and it doesn't have that gem installed, then the system would just tell you, please install XYZ gem, rather than failing with an obscure error that it can't find factory definition or something. So this is a nice practice. Another convention that we like to adhere to is to install gems here. Factory girl. Okay. You can specify a version that it should be equal to or greater, and this lib stuff is, yeah, well, not so important. Okay, so now I want to make a factory, and you can look at the doc page of Factory Girl on GitHub. It's really simple. So in the spec folder, we just create a new file called factories. Factories.rb. And that's the file where we instantiate the factories in. So let's see, factory.define. I want to make a factory for the person. Our person object, do. Then takes a block with a person object on it, actually. As a builder object. First name. And then I can stick in here some parameters. And that's it. Oh, thank you. Last name. That's all. So now I can use this. So in here, I could now use the factory.
No, do you have to require it in Stack Alpha?
Nope, it's all for free. The gem does this for you. If you require the gem correctly in the test.rb, then that initializes the gem right there when the test environment comes up, and it loads whatever it needs to load to make this available.
And the test of RB is where?
The factories RB, it sits in the spec. Oh, the test RB.
Yes.
Oh, I didn't show you that, huh? I just, yeah, sorry. It is under config environments test.rb. So the config directory has the environment.rb file in it. It also has a folder called environments, which has Ruby files in it for, but by default, the 3 default environments that it comes out of the box with, the test, the development, the production one. You might have additional ones. Cucumber makes another one there. It makes the Cucumber RB if you install that. Or, you know, in your setup, you might have a staging environment. You can define that also. And that just sets up the test environment. What I mean by environment, it is when you run rakespec, the Rails env variable gets set to test. If you don't specify anything, if you start the server on the command line, it defaults to development. And if you use Capistrano or something or Heroku to push a production app live, then it goes to the production environment. Okay, so let's continue. So now I have a factory. So it's sometimes nice to test a factory, especially if it's complicated. Can make a factory a person from the factory. I don't know what that says, but okay. And then we can just say factory person dot, or let's save the person like this, and we can check stuff on this now. So P should, well, not be null. That would be the first requirement. It should work, actually. And then P also, if you want to specify what kind of object we get, we can verify that it should be a kind of that checks it is an entity of this class. Should be kind of runs the kind of question mark operator, which checks that this object was created from this class, which is the intention of the factory. And that worked. Great. We have now a person from the factory. So now I can go on to actually my required feature. So it, let's see, should find people by partial name match or something. Whoops, sorry. And so, well, now I need a couple people that actually satisfy this. So I need some demo data, basically, to play with. So if I wanted to implement what I had on the slide the second ago here, implement something that, you know, matches JON and matches both Jonah Smith and Paula Jones, then I make factories that create these kinds of people. And in the factory defaults the name, but I can also override each attribute manually. So in here, I'm just going to override the first name with Jonah, because I want to have a Jonah in there. And the last name, to lock it down specifically, close this, the last name with Smith, and then I want to have also Peter, last name Jones. So now I have two matches there. So this is my setup. If I had more cases, I could put this in the before clause also. You know, I might actually refactor that in a bit if I have more tests for this. For now, we're going to set it up here. Now there's an important step. Now I want to actually verify that my data is non-trivial. Well, I should probably save these guys. Let's call that, this one is Jonah, and this one is Peter. So let's go this far. Okay, still good. All right. Now I want to check, so I want to implement some sort of method now. Person.find by names starting with, this is my short method name I came up with. And I want to put a partial string here. That might come later from some sort of web UI. But we're talking at the model level right now. So that should return, it should return these records, right? We can make another test later to deal with case sensitivity. Yeah, I would defer that to a second case.
Is the order in the array?
Yes, the order is significant. Also, the order just picked it this way because I made them in sequence here, and database insertion order is the same order as in which it will be retrieved without further ordering clauses on there. But this is a good point. I want to check that my assumptions are correct. This line here verifies my assumptions. It's always important. And is this a good test? I mean, this can be implemented. How can this be implemented? .sort. Okay, I'll show you some. Let's go back to person. And I have my short little method name I can't remember. Let's see, what was it?
Right down there, a little right.
To the right. That was not my intended. Don't know what that thing is about. Shift F10 is what I meant to press. Find, what's the problem? Find undefined method, find name starting with for class. Right, self. Let me show you. I'm invoking it here on the class itself, just like person.find with a capital P, so I forgot to put self dot. This is a class method as opposed to an instance method. It operates on the class, doesn't have access to the instance variables. Wrong number of arguments. Okay, let's throw in an argument. Some sort of search term. So my test passes now. Is this? No, it hasn't been a good test. The point I'm trying to drive home here is my data set is trivial. And I want a non-trivial data set to actually show the effect of the thing I'm trying to test, because in here I just threw in person all, I don't even use the search term for anything, and my test passes. So I wouldn't write a test in this sequence. I just wanted to show you that it's easy to get sidetracked if you're not sure that the data set is non-trivial. So let's make a non-trivial data set. Let's make another person in here. Let's call him, what? Her, Sally. Whoops. Sally Miller. Okay, so I should, this is my check step, this is my data what I expect it to be. That's what this is verifying. So now I have Sally in here too. Now this is getting a little better now. Because now my line 54 actually is failing. So the expectation is no longer matched because my data set is non-trivial anymore. So I have actually a case where that finder needs to be discriminating. Does that make sense, guys? That's really important. Okay, so now how can I fix this? So I need to find something here, right? So this is coming back to this custom finder topic. So all is actually the same as find all, and it takes options. Like what? Like, give me some examples here. What's an option that the finders take?
Conditions, first name equals geometry.
Conditions, yes. Other options that it could take. Not that we need those, but just to brainstorm a little bit, see what the knowledge is of options. Order, it can take order, right? It can take a slew of things, which is documented on the api.rubyonrails.org. I'm sorry?
Is like?
Like.
Yeah.
Like is a SQL statement that we'll use in a second, yes. Let's try conditions.
Does all work with the options first and last?
Do these options, the question is, there's also a method called first and last here.
Yeah.
Yes, first that returns, first throws in a limit 1, and last throws in a limit 1, and it doesn't say anything about the order. So unless you specify, yes, so the question is, does first take the same parameters? It does.
No, does all take the parameter first?
Does all take the parameter first? No, it does not. But find does. You can do this. Or you can do find all. If it was about 2 years ago, this would be the only way you could do it. But all and first is now directly implemented. So, right. So let's go back to this. Okay. So all, let's put in some conditions here. Conditions. And now I want to, now I'm in SQL land here. I'm in SQL territory, and I want to match this term against the first and the last name. Depends how familiar you are with SQL. Any ideas how that can go? Like is a good one. Okay, like what? What's like what? Term is like something. How about like, how about first name like? Okay. So like something. What is that something? Percent. Yes, that's good.
And then J-O-N.
J-O-N, right? So I could hard code it here. Like this? Right. So that hard codes something that will actually pass the test. Oh, no, it didn't.
You want term here.
So first of all, I don't want to hard code the string there. Correct. Yes, thank you. And I also want to match the last name because I set up the test to match both the first or the last name. Right. So I need an or. Okay. So what do I do with the term though? Like where does that go here somewhere?
I thought we wanted to write a simple test first. John,
We can hard code it. Yes. It's an advanced class though. Or, okay, last name, like like something. John, percent, quote. Okay, let's see how far we get here. All right. That worked. Okay, great. So I guess my data set isn't good enough. All right, this is no longer computer science 101, right? I don't have to pretend. I'll let you gonna break in a second. We need something here that references the term somehow. How can we do that in Rails or conditions in Rails? Hash curly bracket. So like this. Thank you, you said that. Okay.
What if the term is like McDonald or O'Doul or something?
Yes, so Kai's bringing up, okay, what if the term has already a single quote in it? Then we have two single quotes, and then SQL probably doesn't parse it so well. It might, in the best case, might give me a nice database error. In the worst case, what can happen here?
SQL injection.
Yes, what is SQL injection? Yes, delete the database. So if this word came straight from the web UI, somebody could put in here, quotes, semicolon, truncate table, or drop database, or something. So we need to sanitize this. Yes, thank you. So we must never, ever put string expansion into SQL queries and like conditions, or conditions of any sort. Rails has a nice feature for this. So we can just stick in here a question mark. That's one way. And here another question mark. We can also do, actually, yeah, we'll get to that. We can also do term colon term, and then there's a nice feature. So now this needs to be in an array, and then the last parameter of the array takes a hash that I can set to these values that I want to have here. And in this case, I would like the term plus a percent sign or something. So this gets replaced. So this looks like a hash key, and then ActiveRecord goes through and replaces the hash keys that it finds here at the last parameter with all these ones. You can use multiple hash keys in here, and you can have a hash of different things back here. That's a nice feature. The older one is the question mark syntax, which replaces each question mark with successive values of the array. What is the difference here? Yes, very good. If you do it this way, if you use this term feature, this hash feature, hash term, hash key feature, or you use the question mark operator here, then ActiveRecord will sanitize the query for you. Thank you. And it does it in a way that filters out the bad stuff, so you could no longer put quotes, semicolon, drop database.
Do you not need the single quotes around the term? For like the SQL?
Yeah, I need somewhere single quotes, obviously, right? Something didn't pan out here. Let's see what actually the problem is. There's an end missing. Oh, I think it likes to have curly braces around this here. First of all. That worked. So, Leah, no, we don't, because if you put in a string here, it's smart enough to figure out this should go as a string into the SQL query, and it puts quotes. Let's take a look at the query actually in real life here. See, this is the query that it made. This is the test log, by the way. In RubyMine, you have the tab right here. That's nice. On the command line, you have a folder called log, and then there's a test.log file that has the same content. And in here, we see select star from people where first name like, and see the quotes here? It made those for us because the sanitizer also figures out if it needs to do any quoting or something based on the data type. Cool. Questions about this? Let's take a break. So the question is, or the comment was from Mark, SQL Standard doesn't prescribe an ordering on the results. My experience is that the things we deal with here, Postgres, MySQL, and SQLite 3 actually does return them in the order of insertion. But if you want to be explicit about this, you can say here, order ID, and you can even say ascending. And then you should get them back in the order that they were inserted in. And the ID is an incrementing, auto-incrementing field.
So actually I was commenting on the next test. That would
Oh, this one here?
be more likely to not return things in order, depending on how things are indexed.
That could also, yep, that could also be true. And it's probably good practice here too to put a comma, which brings me to the next thing. Order, whoops. You could actually order this one. There might be a more sensible order here. You could order this by last name. So if you wanted to order this by last name, let's see what the last names are. Jonah Smith and Peter Jones. So this actually would be in the incorrect order then. If we wanted to impose a last name order here, let me do this in the TDD style without doing the code first. Okay, so Mark brings up the point we should guarantee the order of this, and that might actually be a nice feature to throw in here, that we sort these things by last name and return them in that order, the matches. And then Jones comes before Smith. So to get that, let's run the test suite. And then it says here, expected to have Peter Jones first, but it got Jonah Smith first, and then the other options here correspondingly. So very good point. So this can be fixed with throwing an additional parameter in here. And as you see, these guys can get bulky. So order, now I want to sort by last name in ascending order. All right, good point. Cool. So this is this falls under the category that I mentioned earlier, custom finder. And our pattern for custom finders is this one we've discussed, factory we've discussed. Oh no, actually we haven't discussed this slide I want. Our pattern for custom finders is to create the smallest non-trivial data set, and we saw what that means. So be sure it's non-trivial. You should actually check the data set is non-trivial, because otherwise you're fooling yourself, and you don't want to fool yourself in a test. And then run the finder, and then you verify that the results include the subset of your data you wanted. And you know, here's sort of the example pseudocode of the stuff we just did. And so there's one other refactoring I want to introduce to you, and that is under the named scope. So we currently did what I would call a custom finder. You know, we had, you know, our find by custom something, our find by first name beginning with. Is there a better way? And yes, there is a better way. We can use a named scope, and we'll see in a second whether it's better. So now I have a test coverage, right? So now I can refactor to my heart's content without worrying about breaking anything. So what I want is something called named scope. Who has seen this before? 3 people, okay, good. Named scope. It basically turns into a class method, so you can give it the same method name, which I will use here. And I'll comment this thing out. And now this thing is basically just a hash that now takes all sorts of stuff. So you can now return things, you can run conditions in here, and you can put other things in here. It's just a way to name a set of attributes. This is really nice. When you use your controller later, you can just say controller.find blah. You don't have to specify all the conditions. It's kind of like, in the use of it, it's similar to this, but it has other advantages. So let's see if we can make this work here. Okay. So named scopes can either just take straight conditions like this, or they can also take parameters. In this case, I want to take the term as a parameter, And in that case, you have to make a lambda out of it. So lambda, and actually there's a comma missing here. So now that variable gets passed into me here, into the lambda block, and now I can, do something in the lambda block. And the only requirement is that the thing inside the named scope return a hash of ActiveRecord options, finder options. So now I can just copy and paste the condition that I had down here. It's the exact same condition convention syntax. I can throw that in here. And same with the order. And then let's see if we comment this out. If our code still works. Cool. All right, we refactored this using this named scope feature. So why am I making a big deal of this named scope feature? I think it's another underused feature that is what's cool about this. It is composable. So I could use my custom finder thing, and then I can call other stuff on it. Like if this person, for example, had some sort of custom finder, it returns a set of persons, and then I can call addresses on it or count on it or other things. So I can treat it as if it was an association or it was another ActiveRecord method, which is not the case if I have my def self dot, custom something rather homegrown thing. It's also testable with proxy options. So if the custom finder gets pretty complicated, I can test it in a little more implementation-specific way, which I'm not going to get into right now. Does this make sense? Like a question, Stuart?
Sorry, I don't get what you mean by composable.
Okay, composable. So we have this custom finder. Let's step back 1 second here. I want to count how many people get returned from my special query. Make a I'm going to script console here. Make it a little bigger and probably a little higher. So I have person dot let's see, what was it? Find with all right, my database doesn't contain much. So I could here now I could require the factory, or I can just make a person.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, so now I got a couple of records here. Find by name starting with John, I get well, how many? So I call this count here. Now this count happens where? You're right. So it's an array. So this thing returned here is an array, right? Now if I switch to the named scope, and also I want to set up ActiveRecord base. I was wondering about that. .logger equals logger.new std out. What does this do? This gets me actually the ability to log requests here. So every time I make a database query, it actually splits it right here, which is nice. So now I want to go back to find this. So see how this is different now? Using this, I get a named scope. And if I run a count query on this, this actually will do a select count star now, which is not the case if I have my array and call count, then it just does a Ruby operation on it. This is important. This is a kind of a trivial example, but if I had some other complicated things on there, you know, the person will soon have a has many addresses association on it. So I could call the result of this dot addresses, and it would just make a compound query on this. This is what I mean by composable. So you can use it as any other piece of the associations, and you can make little features that you might reuse and group them into these composable named scopes. It comes in handy for a number of various things.
So is
Stuart.
it more efficient if it does it?
Yes, this one would be a more, well, yeah, this one would be a more efficient query because it doesn't have to return all the objects. So you save a lot of time by not having to instantiate all the objects into Ruby in the first place, and then just returns a single number. For these count type things, and it does this automatically, right? You don't have to specify what to do. It does this because ActiveRecord supports this count extension, and if you call count on, you know, on person itself, it does the same thing, or call count on an association, or can count on these active scopes. It's just a way, this is equivalent to jamming all these conditions into the count. It's a way to reuse conditions and preset parameters on finders. So I could put in this stuff in here with the like query and all that stuff into the count itself. And so I can use a name, this is why it's called a named scope. It scopes data to a narrower set, and you give it a name, and you reuse it that way. The next pieces that I want to go over is associations. Associations is a big topic. We've experienced associations already in the addresses we had last week, and generally, oops, I need to click next here. This is, by the way, some sort of Flickr association picture. I got it from Flickr. Generally, you know, the reason you want these is because you have some sort of relationship between entities. And if you have those relationships, you want to be able to make queries on it. Like, given a person, I want to know all that person's addresses. Or given a customer, I want to find all their orders. Or given a customer, I want to find all the items they bought through orders in between. Rails maps this. So SQL is ideal for this. This is actually where SQL really shines. It's relational databases. It's what the term is for this technology. And it's what it's about. It's about relationships. And relationships arise from these foreign keys. We saw that already. You stick a foreign key into some table, and that references another table. That's the relationship. ActiveRecord maps this with has many and belongs to attributes on the model. And there's the three flavors here. There's the has many, the has one, and the belongs to. The belongs to is always the one on the side of the foreign key. And then there's also a has many through, which uses a join table in the middle. And what does this look like in detail? I stole this shamelessly from the Ruby on Rails guides. And as you see here, the belongs to is always on the side where the foreign key is at. That's the only thing that's really important. And then if you have a has one or a has many, just determines which kinds of methods Rails makes available for you. But the one on the has many side, actually, the table doesn't have anything special in it. And the relationship arises through the declaration of the has many, and that adds new methods to Rails. And some of these methods we've seen, like the addresses.create, for example. So what does this look like in the migration? We saw this earlier also. In the migration, the side with the foreign key, you can do a belongs to, over here. You can do a belongs to person, and that corresponds to the belongs to declaration in the model class. The has many part of the model class, the reflective one, doesn't have anything in the migration that's special.
And now you've gotten rid of that T integer person ID on the left?
Yes, so these are equivalent. The question is the T belongs to in the migration over here, is that the same as T integer person ID? Yes, they are equivalent. Okay, so I mentioned methods. So the relationship exists in the database. The belongs to declaration that has many declaration has the effect of making new methods available. And what are those methods? In the belongs to case, we had an address that belongs to a person, right? You can then say address.person. So what is my person? And that actually returns the full-blown object. You can assign a new person with the equal here. This is the assigner. And you can also build a person. Given an address, you can make a person, or you can create a person. The difference here is build is in memory and create is in database on disk. For the has many association, there's more. There is, so if a person has many assets, perhaps, you have the .assets method, which returns an array, or it's actually a proxy, but it behaves like an array of objects. You can assign new objects to the collection. You can assign a whole array to the collection. You can delete objects, you can clear, you check for empty. You can create is interesting. You call assets.create. Compare that over here, you have create_person. The syntax is a little bit different because on the belongs to side, you only talk to one other object. On the has many side, you talk to a collection of objects. And so this is the way they implemented that. Same for build and same for find. This is also an important one. The finder, this happens, for example, if you want to find objects belonging to another object. So for example, assets here, let's say there's a person. Person has many assets. I can say person.assets.find, and then I can make a query. And that query will be having additional conditions put into it automatically to constrain it against that person only. It's a powerful feature. And then I want to briefly take a look at the has many through. So the has many through is a way to make an intermediate join table. This is a many-to-many relationship that is mapped here to tables. And typically, this example is also from the Rails guides, which I recommend as reading. So you have a physician, and that physician has many patients, but a given patient also has many doctors. So there's a many-to-many relationship between these two objects. And the way this is mediated is through this appointments table. So if this is like a clinic or something with many doctors and many patients, then each appointment would be specific to a person and a patient. But any given patient can have multiple appointments and multiple doctors, and each doctor can have multiple appointments and multiple patients. And this is how it's mapped. So the physician has many appointments. This is the first requirement. And then the physician has many patients through appointments. And the second line makes available, I shouldn't have clicked. The second line makes available the physician.patients. So you can call it directly and ignore the whole thing that goes on underneath with the joining and everything. That's the power. So the method that gets made available is transparent to the join table in the middle. Same for the patient. It's symmetrical. And then the appointment has two belongs to relationships only. It's a powerful way to map many-to-many relationships. Question? Yep. So the question is, if the patient didn't have any appointments records, then patient.physicians would return empty array. Correct. There's one other thing I want to touch on. That's the database implementation performance. It's really important to have indices. Do you guys know what indices are on a database? Right. Anytime you have something referenced in a where clause, you should have an index on it for performance. In Rails, sometimes that can easily fall off the table because you're not really so aware when a where clause shows up. But the general rule is any association query, like person.addresses, involves a where clause. It matches the person ID against the addresses. Then you should always have an index on that. Otherwise, the database has to do a full table scan to find the matches, and that's really slow. That's linear time. With an index, the database can do it in logarithmic time. All right, how to test for associations. Like we had something in the homework, right? We had has many addresses. What's the pattern? The pattern is this. First of all, check if the associations are present. And you can easily do that with a respond to, like here. The person should have addresses. That means the method is there. That means somebody put the has many thing there. Check. Good. Done. Checking for one is enough. And we don't have to try to make complicated create, object trees. Like we don't have to try to actually create that stuff in the database. We don't try to test that Rails works. We just try to test that we put the correct declaration there. Now, however, if you use options on the has many association, they'll say what that is, then you should probably do a little more elaborate test than just checking for the presence of the method. And what can these options be? Does this make sense so far? Okay, let's keep going. The options can be ordering. So you can have, and what did I do wrong here? Has many people, order last name ASC. So, somebody, I don't know, this might be like a site or some entity, like a company might have many people or employees, and you could return those in an ordered fashion. That is totally valid. So you see the similarity here to the Finder options. You can actually pretty much use all the Finder options in these associations as well. You could check for class name. So, we might have an application that has a concept of customers, but we have a table called person and a model called person. Then we want to reuse that people table or that person object as customers, and we can just rename it this way. Conversely, foreign keys. You might have a person model, people table, and you want to use those people as senders and recipients of messages. So you have a message class, and the message belongs to a recipient and a sender. Then you need to map specifically what the foreign key is named if you want to use the person again. It's the only way it makes sense here. And you can put these conditions on. You can condition things like this. This is another message implementation. For example, if you have like an emailing system, a messaging system, you might want to find out how many unread messages does somebody have versus how many messages are there in total. And you can just make as many has many declarations as you want. You can have has many messages, and then in addition you can have has many unread messages. And the difference is that it takes different conditions here. And I wanted to actually go over an example, but we're out of time a little bit. So I'm going to leave you this, and I'll post the example to the website or to the GitHub repository. And if you want, I can walk you through it after class a little bit. And then, well, if you use these options, how should we test for them? So then it becomes important that we have a non-trivial data set again. We need to set up some data like ordering or the unread messages example. We need to actually have some read messages in our test data and some unread messages to make a sensible test case that checks the difference. Here's an example with zip codes. It's a trivial example, but it's important to have non-trivial data sets. It's the message. And lastly, there's other association options which are joins. That's where SQL is good at, joining things. And you can use the include option here. That actually I don't want to go over right now. Are you guys, who has heard of joins before? What's an inner join versus an outer join? What's the difference? Cross product, Cartesian product. Okay. Joins are familiar? Good. There's some slides on joins. I'll post the slides afterwards. You can review those. The one last thing I want to go over is how, well, actually, it's the same stuff as before. Test association joins. Make sure you don't have a non-trivial data set. Make sure you have a non-trivial data set. And with that, I want to Let's see here. Okay, I have a little demo that I could prepare. That we are over time right now. I don't want to hold you longer. 8:30 was our ending time. I could do a little demo about this messaging example, like to see, you know, how a message can have both a sender and a receiver. We use the foreign key option. We use the class name option. And then the homework is about customers and orders and items. So you have 3 tables, and you have some options there to you know, query stuff so it has many associations and make tests for it. Should I go on to the demo, the messages? Yeah? Okay. All right. If you need to leave, feel free to leave. Won't hold that against you. 9 o'clock. Okay. I'll try to rush. Very good. Okay, so I want to set up a simple messaging system. Oh, I'm still in the presentation. Yes, please. Exit. Okay. Simple messaging system, and I need new migration for it. Script generate RSpec model message I want, and the message should have a sender. Whoops, sender ID integer, and the message should have a recipient ID integer, and the message should have a subject string, and the message should have a body, which we're going to put a text field that could be unlimited amount of text. And then probably we should also have a red at, which is a red at is a timestamp, and that gets recorded whenever the message was opened first. That's the intention. All right, got my migration. Let's take a look. The generator did what it's supposed to do. Looking good here, right? Okay. So let's start with the message. Message spec. Okay. So first of all, I want to not do this. And then I need a couple of validations. And I'm just going to use the same trick that we used before. I need a sender, I need a recipient, and I need a subject. I'm going to require that these are there. I'm going to say each do attribute, it must have the attribute. And then our same trick as before, message.new, should not be valid, or if we go with Lauren, we should actually pull this one out into a before block. And then I can say here m.errors.on attribute should not be nil. All right, let's get going here. Actually, another thing I really do need is for our test pattern, we need to actually make sure that there's some association stuff. So this is validation. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's postpone this for 1 second. Let's do describe it belongs to a sender, and I want here my message to respond to sender. And similarly, I want it to do the same for the recipient. This is the test to check that my association declaration is correct. Start here. Run, actually, rake spec. Here we go. Oh, I haven't migrated. I have not migrated. Right, it tells me that. It told me that down here also. Run, rake, migrate. worked in. Okay. And you guys are not paying attention. I should also put in indices here, right? What did I say about that? Add index messages. And I need it on the sender ID. And so you can also make a compound index which contains multiple fields. Recipient ID. And now I need to do a redo, right?
You need an index the other way too? Recipient ID sender ID?
I'm sorry?
Do you need an index that reverses where those two also?
No, I think the database, if you query only for one of them, it's smart enough to figure this out, to use the index. Actually, true enough, yeah, it does depend on the database. Well, if you want to be absolutely sure, you don't mind paying the cost, you could also just make one each. But Mark's right, actually, the database dependencies and this kind of thing are relevant. Actually, no, I wanted to do redo, there we go. Create message, yes. Okay, you could also index by the subject if you want to search by subject later. Okay, message spec. So let's see here. Rake spec one more time. Okay, so it failed here. Belongs to expected the message to respond to sender, and it didn't. Right, that's the correct failure. So now I pull up the message, and here it is. And now the only thing I'm trying to test for is that I put the correct belongs to here. This might seem overly trivial, but I like this because Ruby is a dynamic language, and typos will not be caught anywhere other than a test. Let's rerun the spec. Oh, at the moment I'm not, actually, good point. At the moment I'm not checking anything against the database. I'm just doing everything with new and memory only declarations. So this hasn't been mapped to anything yet. This is why I said earlier, our test, you know, if I have a belongs to relationship without any further options, then this is good enough. This just makes sure that I put the belongs to there and I didn't misspell anything. Now, if I want to test that this actually works, then I have to do some other stuff. And we'll see that in a second. And in this case, actually, we do need to do that. So it'll become important in a second. And let's go there right now. It can retrieve a person. Well, rather a sender. And that is a person object. And here we need to actually do something. So I want to make a factory that makes a message. And then I want to say message.recipient. Now the message should be valid by this time, which I haven't checked yet. And the message should probably also require the recipient to be there. Should not be valid. Yes, I say one thing and do the other. Thank you, John. Message dots errors. Wait a minute. Message.sender should not be nil. And message.sender, I want to also check that's the right object returned. Should be, yes, kind of person, right? So I'm using the person table here, and the person has two functions. It can be either a sender or a recipient. So that's one thing we have to do. And it says no such factory, message, kaboom. Before I go there, actually, I'd like to go back to this and put the validations in there to make sure that I have these requirements in there before I put the factory together. The factory should always have valid stuff in it, and right now it's failing here. expected. So there's a failure here. Yellow, that's an assertion failure, and red is actually an error, an exception. So it expected the message not to be valid, but it was valid anyway, and the reason is, of course, I haven't put in the validation rules. Dates, presence of sender, comma, recipient, and subject. Okay, so validations pass. Now, still no factory, so let's make the factory. I can just put more factories in here, no problem. That file can grow a little bit. You can also make multiple files in a factories directory. Message to m dot. Now what? M dot sender. That actually is a person. So I could put an ID here and hard code a number, but that wouldn't be very scalable. I'd really like to have a person here, and I also have an association, and the factory is actually smart, and this comes back to your question, what does factory add in addition to just being a nice shortcut? You can stick this in here, association, no, I tried it, association, person, no, actually sender, right? Now this sender is not a person, or there's no association here, so we need to tell the factory what factory to use for this. Now this means the message model has an association by the name of sender, it has a belongs to, and it should instantiate a person factory. So it's going to go up here and look up this definition, and it'll create a person on the fly for me. And that is a nice shortcut. And similarly for the recipient. Does this make sense? So I'm reusing the other factory, and I'm telling it there's an association that's a person object under the hood. Let's try that.
You need to do something with the subject?
The subject. Oh yeah, the subject should be set correctly also. Right. It's not where it failed though. It failed here, uninitialized constant message sender. Spec line 27 in the factory. So something went not quite right here, and this comes back to your question, Kai, earlier. Don't I have to tell it somehow that there's a relationship between the person and the sender? Because in our message right now it just says sender, and this isn't really anything that's defined anywhere. So I need to tell it here that it actually should use the person table and the person class, and I do it that way. If I didn't rename this, so if I had it like this, like here, I could just say person. That would work out of the box. But since I want to have a sender and a recipient, I want this kind of syntax, this kind of semantics for my message. I'm renaming the table here basically, so I need to tell it what class it should be using. And then I can say person, a message.sender, and it knows, oh, this is actually a person class, and it has all the properties of a person. Okay, now we got that far. And, well, that's all the message needs. The person conversely can have many messages, and, you can, on the person, we can figure out how we can get the read messages and the unread messages. So the person spec, here, first of all, let's see where we are in the lineup here. Associations, okay. And the person, let's see, the person.new.should respond, oops, there's no underscore there, thank you, to messages, right, that just checks that it has the has many declaration. Let's see if it passes or fails. It fails miserably.
You need it.
Oh, it, yes, thank you. It has messages. Okay, expected person to respond to messages. It doesn't. Okay, so now let's throw in a has many here. Has many messages. Beautiful. Great. Oh, let's actually try to pull up a message. So it can retrieve messages. Let's throw some factory at this message. Now, that's my message. Now that message has a recipient in it, right? Which is also a person. And now from that point of view now, as the person, I can now retrieve my messages. I should be able to retrieve my messages, but something failed. Statement invalid, SQLite 3 exception, no such column. Messages.person ID. So what went wrong here? Messages belong to the person. Sender, class name, person, recipient, right? But which one is it? Is it the sender or the recipient? So it tries to find a person ID, but there isn't a person ID in the message. There's only a sender ID and a recipient ID. So I have to tell it which foreign key to use, and that's where the foreign key option comes in. Now when I say messages, chances are I want to actually be the recipient of it. So I'm going to ask for the recipient ID. So when I call person.messages, I want all those messages for which I am the recipient. So the foreign key would be a recipient, and then it would check messages.recipient, and that exists. Cool. All right. And now I can also make, which I'm not going to do because we're off time, in unread messages that throws in a condition, just like the finder. It throws in a condition to check if the red add flag is nil or not nil. You guys can sort that out. It's going to be in the uploaded GitHub project. And with that, I want to go to the last bit of class. Yay, homework. Oh, no. It's optional. It covers the stuff we did today. If you want to deepen this and reinforce it and practice it, then check out the homework. And we'll go over it to some extent, not in as much detail as we did today for the homework from last time. We'll go over it in some extent next week. But it covers the same features we already discussed. And it's basically about a store with orders and customers. And so there's customers that can order things, and the order contains multiple items. So there's multiple items per order. So there's customers, orders, and items. And that has multiple relationships on it. And there's extra credit here. Try to see if you can get a ranked list of the most popular items. That's a join with the order and sorted by frequency. Or another one of these. These last two ones involve these conditions that I talked about on the has many association. With that, class is out. Thank you.